If I want to send money to you, I send money to you through
Yeah.
WhatsApp. If I want to order a taxi, if I want to whatever, you just have two apps. So there basically there is no cash for 2 months. I haven't taken out. I've never seen any cash. So when I came here, I was in first Colombia. I have to take out money, change that. Then you leave the country. Then you realize, I had another 100,000 pesos that I have to change them now. I'm going to get a very bad currency, exchange it for that. And then uh, it's very, it was very easy just to do that. You have it on your phone. You pay.
Yeah.
So if the world would work like this, I'd be the happiest person alive, actually.
Cata, I'm glad we
Yes.
were able to make this happen.
Yes.
This is kind of an impromptu show. We met last night actually at the Papusaria. We were sitting there with Chambera and Dylan Leclerc, and you came up to us, and I think you were trying to use your Bitcoin wallet. And
I tried because I have no prior experience using Bitcoin, so I just wanted to pay with Bitcoin. And the girl that was selling the pupusas
uh-huh.
told me, you know what? You can ask those guys who are at the table." And he was like, "Which guys?" I said, "Okay, those guys." Okay, and this is why I came up to your table.
Yeah, so we actually had a fun time. You wound up sitting down with us and telling us a little bit about your story. You're a YouTuber or a travel vlogger that travels around the world. And I pulled up your channel today, and you have like 700,000 subscribers, right?
Yes,
Something
yes,
like that.
close to that, close to
I
that.
was
Yeah.
like, whew. So I think you had like 150 million people have watched your videos overall, which is that's super impressive. So I'm curious to dive into that and how you got into that as a career. But before that, um, last night you were talking about how you'd been in El Salvador before,
Yes.
and yeah, I don't want to take your thunder. So you tell us why you wanted to come again, what you were hearing in the news, and how that compared to what you'd seen before. And yeah, so take it away.
So when I first arrived in El Salvador was, I think, late 2016, something like that. I was in Colombia, and then I had some friends who arrived in El Salvador, wanted to visit the country. I flew from Colombia and actually spent just one night in San Salvador, and then I came to El Tunco, where I think I stayed with my friends for a couple of days. Then we went to Nicaragua. Why we went to Nicaragua? Because back home we knew that Nicaragua was one of the safest countries here in the area. So for us it was like, okay, we're going to El Salvador because my friends found a very cheap ticket to El Salvador, and I said, okay, we just go there. We're not going to visit. We are scared, whatever. Okay, we're just going to go there and then take a bus and cross Honduras and go to Nicaragua. And because I arrived very late at night, I said, you know what, I'm just going to stay at a hotel, and then in the morning, I will go to El Tunco. I didn't know back then that the airport was actually closer to El Tunco. So for me, it was like, I go to the capital and then I go to El Tunco. And the morning when I saw that, well, it's much closer to actually go from the airport to El Tunco, I was like, okay. And I remember I arrived. Uh, I knew very very few things about El Salvador. Just the fact that it was a dangerous country. But to put it into context, whenever you think about Latin America, like going south from Mexico, you hear just crime, poverty, and whatever. So it wasn't something special for me arriving in El Salvador. This is what I thought. I arrived in my hotel. I checked in. I don't remember the name of the hotel. I don't remember the area. And then when I wanted to leave to actually just buy something to eat at 9 p.m. more or less, I remember that the girl at the reception strongly advised me against this, which for me was pretty odd because it wasn't like in the other Latin American countries where people are like, you know what, you should be careful. No, it was a very straight, no, you shouldn't go outside now. I was like, but what is like a revolution? What? No, 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 you shouldn't go. It's dangerous. Of course, me considering myself pretty ballsy, I didn't pay attention to her. I wanted to leave the hotel, and then I remember there was a gentleman, let's say in his maybe mid 50s or something like that, guarding the hotel. And the only thing that I remember is that he carried the gun that was larger, taller actually than him. He had a huge gun. And this guy told me, no, no, you shouldn't leave. You shouldn't leave the hotel. Now it's night. There is no public lighting around here. So you shouldn't leave, And this was something that shocked me. Of course, I left. It was a market very, very close. I went and I ate something, and it was really strange on the street. I actually saw a guy who was just doing his basic necessities on the street. There was another guy who approached me asking for some money or whatever. But what really shocked me was the fact that everything happened during pitch black. It was full darkness, no light, no nothing.
At 9 p.m.
9 p.m.
Yeah.
This is something because I remember I had a big camera that I was using back then, and of course I said, okay, I'm going to go film. I'm in El Salvador. And then when I left the hotel, let's say 50 meters, I got scared, and then I put the camera in my backpack, and I have no footage actually from that trip. So that was everything, and it's really interesting for people to understand that it wasn't my first time in Latin America. So this happened in late 2016. I was traveling throughout Latin America for more than 9 months, 10
And
months.
you speak good Spanish too.
No, back then, no. But of
Okay.
course, I could communicate. It
Yeah.
was easier for me to communicate and just, I don't know, have a basic conversation with somebody. So this was my first interaction with the country. My first interaction. After that, the second day, I came to El Tunco. We stayed here for a couple of days. But I really remember that everybody was from my, well, not paranoid, but everybody was very, they were showing an excessive care
Yeah.
towards my well-being, Years passed. I didn't come back to Central America. I just went in that trip. I went to Guatemala, like everybody.
Yeah.
When they come to Central America, they just go from country to country. And a couple of weeks ago, I was actually in China, and then I said, you know what? I feel I want to go back to Latin America. I flew to Colombia. I stayed in Colombia for a while, and then I went to Guatemala. And my mother one night told me, Catalin, tomorrow is the ceremony of Bukele, of the president. You should go and see that. And this is why I decided to actually go from Guatemala City. And I said, okay, I have to be here it happened on a Saturday. I have to be there and I have to see this. And when I arrived, I felt like I arrived to in a different country than back then because, well, during the last couple of years, of course, Bukele has become he's very viral.
Yeah.
Everybody knows about him. In the beginning, there were only positive things and good things about everything that he did here. But then the media and I'm talking about mainstream media now
Yeah.
started saying, oh, okay, the guy is a dictator. He's doing this, he's doing that. He shouldn't do that. He's abusing his power and all that. So this is I came here actually to say, you know what? It doesn't matter what Western media, what mainstream media says. It doesn't matter if I like him or not. What's important here, how people who live here actually think about this. And I had I had the previous experience from many years ago, and I said, okay, I'm going to go on the street and talk to, let's say, 50 people and just make statistics, because it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
And I could say that 99% of the people with whom I talked told me everything is very good now. There wasn't a single person who told me, you should take care with your personal belongings. And numbers don't lie. It's also important to understand numbers don't lie. I did some research back then when I was here. El Salvador had almost 110 or 120 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants, and now it went down to 2.5. And to put things into perspective, Romania, which is one of the safest countries in the world, has like 1.6. I think United States has more than, I don't know, 3 or 4 times.
I think it's like 7.5 or something like that in the United
Something
States.
like that. Exactly. But what's really interesting for me, it is really interesting to understand that this process is not a process that took decades. It's something that happened in a blink of an eye. So I just had one person actually who told me, yeah, Bukele is a good guy, very good what he's doing and all of that. But I have some people who are some relatives who are in prison now, and we know nothing about them. We don't know how to get in touch with them, and all of that. This is the only not bad thing,
Yeah.
but not so positive thing that I've heard. But so far for me is like shocking. I think is the country is the best example of how things can go from rock bottom, under good management and under strong management, which this is really important to understand can how things can improve. So I'm very shocked. I'm very uh, surprised in a pleasant way, and my I don't know, my time here has been amazing so far. I've been here just 1 week, but I
And you feel safe going out at night. You see where before you didn't see anybody on the streets. Like
this is
now the streets are full.
this is another thing, like whenever you go outside, then you don't see people, you know. But also, what people need to understand that when it comes to safety, you need to look to to judge things into perspective. Of course, I'm not going to expect the same level of safety here as, for example, in Switzerland or also back home. As I said, Romania is, you don't hear about homicides. We don't have just some petty crimes, all of that, So no. So when you come here, even though you hear, oh, okay, it's such a safe country, you just have to use your street smart, and the
Yeah.
things that you wouldn't do back home, you shouldn't do them here. That's the only thing. But besides that, absolutely no issue whatsoever.
And have you noticed all the construction and building that's going on here?
Yes, everywhere. And actually, for me, it was really interesting that, as I said, I was just in China, and when I arrived in San Salvador, I didn't do actually any prior research to see how the country has changed. And then when I went to the central part of San Salvador, I saw that big library. I had no idea about that. I was just walking, and then I was filming, and I was like, "What is this?" I've seen this building. I saw this building a couple of weeks ago. They have it in Beijing. They have it in Shanghai. They have it like every big city in China has a big library. And I was like, what is this doing here? And then I started to investigate. I saw it said they're made in collaboration with China, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, much more cleaner the city. I actually walked from the place where they had the ceremony. I went at night there, so I went in the morning to see the ceremony, and then I went at night because I said, I don't think it's so relevant if I go during daytime, and if it's during the ceremony, because it's a special event. So of
Yeah.
course they're going to take extra precautions. I will go at night. I don't know, 7 p.m. I went at 7 p.m. and then I said, you know what? I'm going to go back walking. I was actually in the San Benito neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
I think I had to walk for like 2 hours.
Yeah, that's a long walk.
Yeah,
You walked from
yeah, yeah, yeah,
San
yeah, yeah,
Benito.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Whoa,
just no. I walked the way back.
that's a long walk.
Yes, as because I wanted to see. I said, okay, I
Yeah.
leave at 7 p.m., which means I'm going to arrive home 9. I think I arrived at 10 p.m. because I stopped. I had some drinks and
Yeah.
whatever. And I said, okay, this is going to be interesting. I just had my passport with me, some money, of course, my small camera, and I said, okay, we will see how it goes. And then I just walked, and it's not that okay, nothing happened to me, but it's also I was also just try to pay attention and to say, okay, but nothing happens to me, but is there something weird going on, or how do I feel, or no, absolutely no problem. And usually here in Central America, also Latin America, people need to understand that whenever you think about downtown, for example, back home, if I talk about downtown, is the cleanest and the safest area. In Latin America, it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah. Even in the US and a lot of places, you don't want to go downtown. So,
Wow, is the same thing in the
yeah.
US? Okay.
Depending on where you're at, but certain cities for sure. Yeah.
For me, this was really, it's like a cultural thing because back home, whenever I say, okay, I live in downtown Bucharest, Bucharest is the capital of Romania. I live in the most central area. For me, this is where is the best area. And then we go to the outskirts. That's where, I don't know, have like some bad neighborhoods and all of that. Here, my first contact with Latin America when I arrived in Peru many years ago, in Lima, I said, I'm going to book something in downtown, Plaza de Armas. What? It's Plaza de Armas. It should be very safe there. And when I arrived there, I was like, wait. Oh, here is a bit different. Here, the good neighborhoods are on the
Yeah.
outskirts. I had no idea about this, so I had no prior knowledge to this.
But El Salvador is trying to change that, and they have to a significant degree, as you saw. I mean, they've really revitalized the downtown area, and it's
Uh,
beautiful now.
exactly. I was actually talking to some people that told me, uh, you can just stay now, sleep on the street, and you're going to wake up with your personal belongings. And I said, if you did this a couple of years ago, you wouldn't even have found your shoes. They would have taken everything from you. And I've heard stories like I was on the beach. Before I met you guys yesterday, speaking with some locals, and who were telling me all these stories. People are saying their mid 50s who basically lived their whole lives with this thing in their back of their mind. Uh, if I go outside, somebody might kill me. Us, let's say, if you're like a tourist, a traveler, you only experience this for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, as long as you stay in that country. But you're not involved in social activities.
Yeah.
You are not working. You don't. When you work somewhere, you cannot just choose your workplace. So you are forced to interact with situations that me as a foreigner, I can just stay in my bubble, and I can mitigate the damage that I might receive if I get involved in weird situations.
And even when things were really bad, tourists were kind of off limits. So the gangs didn't really bother them because the repercussions would be much stronger if something happened to a tourist. So even when things were bad, we didn't experience the things like the locals did.
This is very what you're saying now is very true, and I try to explaining people that from the vast majority of foreigners, that for example, that if you hear that, okay, a foreigner got robbed or a foreigner got drugged or something happened to a foreigner, it's really important sometimes to check the background,
Yeah.
to see was he getting involved into some shady business. Because most of the time, if you just do normal stuff, as
Yeah.
you said, people from these gangs, they don't want a bad. For example, what happened now, I was in Guatemala. I wanted to go to some very bad neighborhoods there. A couple of weeks ago, there was the most famous TikToker in Guatemala who was killed. He was 18 years old, and he was killed by Barrio 18 or whatever they call it over there. And people people who actually do this kind of things now, they don't want attention.
Yeah.
So you as a foreigner, in the vast majority of cases, if you're, I don't know, in a bad neighborhood by any, I don't know, bad luck, if somebody comes to you, they can say, okay, give me everything you have. If you don't oppose this, if you don't resist this, it's very, very, very unlikely that they're gonna kill you. If you are a woman, the situation changes a lot. Like I believe that women have, it's much more difficult for, let's say, solo female traveler
Yeah.
to travel through Latin America. Much more difficult. But this is what I try to say, that whenever they blame, they say, oh, okay, a guy went to Colombia, which Colombia has a huge uh, drug related issue right now with foreigners, with girls who drug foreigners and all of that. Ah, he went to Colombia, they robbed him. Okay, but what was he doing? Was he just walking normally? Ah, no, he went to a party with a girl that he found in the street, and she invited him with another girls, and they were doing I don't know which kind of drugs and all of that. Nobody tells you that.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to blame it. Ah, okay, this country is dangerous. Of course, as I said, it's much more dangerous here, or let's say Latin America, than my own home country. Yeah, but still, I wouldn't get involved in shady business in my country.
Yeah.
Why would I do this?
In a place where you don't know the people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always think that's funny. A lot of times people, not funny, but I just don't understand it. They'll go to a place where they don't know anybody, and they'll do things they wouldn't do in their home country. And it's like, you're crazy. For one, you don't know who these people are. Two, if you wind up in jail in Latin America, it's going to be a very different experience than winding up in jail in the US. So, but I don't know what it is. Sometimes people think they have a free pass when they get outside of their home country, and they do stupid things sometimes.
Maybe because you're further away and maybe you feel a bit more relaxed when it comes to
Yeah.
this. And
Well, that's what I always tell people: don't do anything that you wouldn't do in the US.
whenever I talk to people, for example, they tell me stuff or whatever, people who want to do, I don't know, illegal things, I always tell them, you want to do something illegal, do it back home in Europe. You can waive your human rights. You can say, the police forced me, they pushed me. You can do this. There are places in the world. You cannot do this in Asia. You cannot do this in China. You cannot do this in Latin America because you're not home. You need to
Yeah.
respect. You need to understand that the law works completely different here than other parts of the world. And also democracy, which is really important, something that I've understood in the last years, is not the type of democracy that everybody wants. Is not applicable to all the countries. For example, okay, maybe now El Salvador is en ¿cómo se llama? Estado de emergencia for many years now.
Yeah.
For a couple of years, they've extended it. I don't know, 100 times or
State of
whatever.
emergency. Yeah.
State of emergency, and us from back home, from the comfort of my living room, just watching the TV, not having to deal with homicides, I can say, "Wow, that's such a bad thing. He's abusing power." I can say that. But in order to understand the country, I have to understand the context and the history that that country is going through.
No, 100%. 100%. Well, that's why I always tell people come down and see it for yourself. Like, don't listen to what the media is saying. Come down and see it. Talk to people, talk to locals like you've been doing. See what they think about it.
Yeah, that's really important.
So I'm curious as to, I know when we met you yesterday, it was because you were trying to use Bitcoin. And obviously you had heard that Bitcoin was a thing here in El Salvador. So I'm curious as to what you have heard in international news about Bitcoin in El Salvador and why you wanted to use it while you were here.
So the thing is, I have almost zero knowledge when it comes to Bitcoin. I just know the very basic
Yeah.
things. I know just a bit about blockchain, but very, very, very basic stuff. I've never actually had Bitcoin. I never bought Bitcoin, and I've never did anything crypto related in my life. But a couple of years ago, I don't know when exactly when this started, it became more and more known that okay, El Salvador is going to try to adopt Bitcoin, and it is the first country, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken,
First country in the world.
that has adopted Bitcoin. And when I knew that I'm going to come here, I was like, okay, I would like to make a video about this. How does it work? What's the thing with using Bitcoin here? So yeah, and I was able, like, for example, yesterday I paid those pupusas. Today I also bought, I don't a beer, some coffee. I had breakfast. I just went, and it's very easy and very straightforward. Yeah.
Especially for travelers, you're not worried about exchanging money or anything. It's just on your phone. You just
Yeah. That's like for me, because I change countries so often, having to deal with cash currency exchange, do that. It's quite a nuisance, actually, because I remember while I was in China, I was for almost 2 months in China. I've never seen cash. I've never used cash. You just use an app there. China has two apps. There are two apps for everything. Like, for example, just put it this way: it's like on WhatsApp, but the type of WhatsApp, for example, if I speak Romanian, you speak English, I send you audios in Romanian, you receive them in English. If I want to send money to you, I send money to you through
Yeah.
WhatsApp. If I want to order a taxi, if I want to whatever, you just have two apps. So they're basically there is no cash for 2 months. I haven't taken out. I've never seen any cash. So when I came here, I was in first to Colombia. I have to take out money, change that. Then you leave the country. Then you realize, I had another 100,000 pesos that I have to change them now. I'm going to get a very bad currency, exchange rate for that. And then uh, it's very, it was very easy just to do that. You have it on your phone, you pay. So if the world would work like this, I'd be the happiest person alive, actually.
Well, I mean, that's the goal for a Bitcoinized world, that you have one currency that no one country controls. It's something that's totally decentralized, and so nobody can stop certain people from using it. And that's the
Exactly.
great thing about Bitcoin. You can send to anybody in the world. There's no sanctions. There's no nothing that can stop, and so it's open to everybody. So that's what makes it so amazing.
Yeah.
So compared to the news that you had been hearing, you feel like El Salvador is in a much better place compared to how the
No,
news
no, no.
reports.
El Salvador is a different country.
Yeah.
And what really shocked me a couple of days ago, I heard on the news, There were two guys, ex-pandilleros, that did something in the northern part of the country. It was just something on TikTok. I saw it, and then I started to research it. And what I really liked about it, so it was an event that happened, something.
Yeah.
Bukele sent 5,000 people to deal with this, which for me was like, why would you send 5,000? Ah, no, this is to send a message. This is to actually send a message. It's not about to deal with those people, because you can deal with those people very easy.
Yeah.
But the idea is, you know what? We're going. I will go all in. If something happens, if it's like the smallest thing, we are going to go all in. And this works more like a deterrent, I think. For
Definitely.
people to think about doing something 20 times before actually doing it.
No, and it's worked. That's why the murder rate is so low now. People, the gang members who haven't been picked up yet are all in hiding. Nobody wants to try anything because they realize that they'll get caught. So,
Yes.
and it's deterred. It used to be the young people. It seemed fun for them to join the gangs. It didn't seem like there was very many repercussions, and it felt cool to them. Now the young people want nothing to do with the gangs because they realize that they're going to wind up locked up, and so it's really transformed the whole society.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that, I think, is like the best strategy. And I've watched tons of videos of Bukele, tons, all of them, because I made a video in El Salvador, in San Salvador, and I wanted to understand as much as possible. So with 99% of the things that I've heard, that he said, I 100% agree. As I said, from back home, from the comfort of your living room, it's very easy to do politics or
Yeah.
to understand how it works. It's very, very, very easy to do that. But you have to go and you have to visit. For example, for me, it was a huge surprise going to China, which also had tons of negative image about China. And I went there with, how should I say? I went there with very bad stereotypes. I went there, to China, and I was completely blown away as a person. Me, like, I've never been to United States. I'm a very pro-American guy. I'm very pro-liberal. I'm capitalist 100%. I believe in liberal rights and all of that. So everything that has to do with communism or with being a leftist, whatever this means. Back home, this has a very, very important meaning for us,
Yeah.
because Romania, we were under the Soviets for many years. We had the revolution back in 1989. My father actually went outside. I have friends, my father's friends, who went to fight for our liberation. So for me, anything that's related to socialism, it's something that I rejected a lot. But once you go to China and you see some things happening there, you say, okay, who am I to say that these social model works everywhere? You have to also understand that there are some countries, like, for example, if you take this whole continent, if you take this whole part of the world, Latin America, people are more violent here because they are more passionate here. So passion can also be, is like a two-edged sword. You can be more passionate doing good things, but you're also going to be more passionate doing bad things. So the same thing that applies in, let's say, in Japan, you're never going to be able to steal the Japanese model and to put it here.
Yeah.
So you have to adapt according to the people.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious as to how you wound up being a travel vlogger, and you've obviously developed a very loyal following. Like I said, I was shocked at the number of subscribers you have, and you mentioned beforehand that you started out as a soap opera
Yeah,
star.
yeah, yeah. Well, actually, I was a high school dropout, university dropout. I
Okay.
actually was the black sheep in my family. I have a sister who is a ballerina. She's dancing now for the last 8 years. She's been working for. She works for the National Opera Ballet in Birmingham. She studied in Germany, then she danced in Switzerland, in Zurich, and now she's been living maybe 7 or 8 years or more, I think, in the UK. So she was the how should I call it? She was the good child, and now, as I said, high school dropout. No, high school, almost high school dropout, because I graduated high school. Then I went into studying political science. After the first 2 semesters, I quit, and then I started to become an actor, and then I got kicked out because I don't know, I was never able to actually integrate into. It was very difficult for me to integrate into society. I was always a bit of a lone wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And this was mid 2000s. Well, my life was pretty shitty actually back then. And then one night in 2008 or something else, my mother called me and said, Kathleen, there's like an audition for a soap opera or whatever. And of course, I was very skeptic. I was just playing video games, playing Counter-Strike, playing StarCraft back in the day. I was like obsessed with this. And then I
I
said,
remember Counter-Strike.
yeah, it was crazy, crazy, crazy. This is actually why I lost two universities. This is why I lost like two or three relationships. I jobs and whatever, just because of that. Gained more than 30 pounds back then, just because of that. So my mother told me, you have to go audition for this. I was like, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this. I don't care about this. I don't want. And then she pushed me. Then I went. I got the part, and then it was one of the. We started with a 12 with a season of 12 episodes, and then we ended up doing more than 600 episodes, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
Yeah, like for many, many, many years. After 1 year, I also started to be a movie director there, and this was until 2000 and late 2014, when the situation in my country. What people need to understand: we have a border with Ukraine. We are part of NATO. NATO had a very big interest into having tons of influence in my country. And what they did, they gave total power to one of our presidents, and he started to do like a clean sweep to put in prison all the people who were like corrupt and who were against the United States. And most of those people had businesses. And one of that person had the business, the TV station that I was actually working for. And he ended up in jail like
Oh, wow.
many others. This is what happened. And when he ended up in jail, he lost the TV station. Somebody else bought it, and everything changed there. And actually, this is when my contract ended. When the soap opera I was working for, one day, my boss called me and said, "You know what, Catalin, this is our last day. Don't tell anyone. Just finish shooting. Tomorrow, all of you are like unemployed." Which, when you're working in something like this, when you have when I had no qualification, and I was also not willing to work for peanuts, because I had a good life back home. I was like, okay, what can I do? And then I invested the money that I had into some apartments. I invested into real estate. And then I said, you know what? I just want to travel. I want to go somewhere. And 1 week before I turned 29, if I'm not mistaken, I woke up and I said, this was 3 a.m. And I said, you know what? I'm going to buy 1 way tickets, either to Latin America or to Asia. But the ticket has to be close to $700 round trip, or euros. I found the ticket to Peru. I left in 5, 6 days without any prior experience. So I was the type of person who only went in resorts. I went a couple of times to Spain, to the United Kingdom, but that was like very, very mainstream. And I went to Peru. I traveled in Peru for like 3 months, and Brazil. I crossed the Amazon jungle on a boat. And then I went back home and I said, okay, I got this out of my system. Now I can just focus on the next step in life. I arrived on the 31st of December. And then on the 4th of January, I bought my next ticket to Asia. And this is when my ex girlfriend from back then, she just told me something. I know what, you're just traveling, you have some money saved up. Why don't you start a YouTube channel? I was like, YouTube? This is so stupid. Who uses YouTube? I was only using YouTube for listening to music, yeah? And I was like, no, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm very reluctant. This is why I have no connection with Bitcoin, because I'm very reluctant to everything that's new in life. It takes a lot for me to actually get into things. And I bought a GoPro 3, I think it was. And then I just started making videos for my mother, for my family. I had 1 view, 5 views, 10 views, 100 views, 400 views. And after 1.5 years, my channel started to take off, but take off in the idea that I had views, but I wasn't making any money. Because how YouTube works based on views, of course, but based on ads, which means how much are advertisers willing to pay for 1,000 views. The problem is that Romania was Back then, it was very bad. And 1,000 views from Romania, an advertiser is not going to pay as much to have an ad placed on 1,000 views from Romania than it pays, I don't know, for some views that come from United States or
Yeah.
from Norway or from Germany. So even though I had millions of views, I wasn't making tons. Like I wasn't making enough to be able to support my travels. So just I think until no, from 2019 it actually took off, and during the pandemic is where it skyrocketed. The pandemic for me was like the best time.
Were you still traveling during that
Of
time?
course, I think I took more than 80 PCR tests. I went to Northern Africa, to Western Africa. I traveled all over Latin America. I enjoyed the fact that there were no tourists. People
Mhm.
weren't. I had to do pre-travel PCR, then arrival PCR, then quarantine for 2 days, then another PCR. And I don't know how was it here, but in many parts of the world, I was paying close to $300 for a PCR
Wow. No, it wasn't that much here, but
because people were like, you know what, you want to travel, pay. This is how they doing it. And most of the PCRs, for example, especially in developing countries, were really like just fake PCRs. No. Actually, I knew how an okay PCR should look like, and I know how was a very dodgy PCR that a medic take. I don't know, just gets the sample from you in a hut somewhere in northern Nigeria, and you have to pay. I don't know. Back home, I was paying $40. There, I was paying $300. You
yeah.
know. So during the pandemic, it actually took off. That was when also advertisers were paying a lot because they started to believe more in the market back home in Romania, and also because people were buying things online and people weren't able to leave their homes,
Yeah.
and what they were doing, watching Netflix or YouTube. So that's when it actually started to take off and to say, okay, I can live off of this.
So do you have people that like companies that sponsor you directly, or is it all through YouTube?
No, the thing is that I'm working with some brands, but they're a very select few brands that I'm working with because as I said, I'm more of a renegade. As I said, lone wolf is very difficult for me to actually follow the guidelines that sometimes brands impose. When I get in touch to the corporate mentality, for me, it's very difficult
Yeah.
because I never worked in that environment. So it's very difficult for me to understand. Okay, there are guidelines, there are deadlines. You cannot talk about this. You shouldn't talk about this. So I actually had a sponsorship for a couple of years with Canon back in the day that I had to. It was a very good deal, a good contract, but I had to end. I had to end it, to terminate it, because I was working. The people were amazing, very good people, but as I said, I'm not used, because I never actually had a 9 to 5. I'm not used to the word you must do this, or this must be included, or you mustn't do this. So I work with maybe 2 3 brands. I rarely say yes to a new brand. So it's been working for me, and I'm hopefully to work in the future. Yeah.
So in an average year, how many days are you outside of Romania?
No, I'm always
You're
outside.
always
No,
outside.
I never. Actually, the last time I was in Romania, I was last year. I was with my girlfriend. My girlfriend is from Argentina, and we just went there because I wanted to show her Christmas in Romania. And before that, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe, let's say from 2015 until now, maybe I spent 8 months altogether back home.
Okay.
And whenever I do this, most of the time I just go there for passport renewal stuff. And for example, if I want to go, and sometimes I visit my family and I go through Europe, and I said, okay, I might go to Romania for a couple of days. But I don't get homesickness. No, I don't have that. My parents are divorced. My mother lives in Norway. My sister lives in the UK. So we are all spread out.
Okay.
So I have friends back home, of course, but I could easily just stay without going to Romania for 1 year, 2 years. No
Yeah.
problem.
Have you spent much time in Argentina then, if your girlfriend's there?
Yes. I traveled.
And have you been there recently since Malay came
No,
in?
no,
No.
I wasn't. I followed. I was in Argentina. She's from Patagonia, the south of Argentina,
Uh-huh.
and I was actually last year there, and I stayed for 2 months because sometimes I took time off. I take time off. I just say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to travel now. I'll find a nice place. I'll book an Airbnb for 1 month or 2 months. I'll just stay there, go radio silent on all my social media, not publish anything, just try to actually, I'm doing this to avoid burnout, because when you do this for years without end, you start to, like, people believe that, oh, okay, an amazing life, you're traveling, yes, but it counts,
Yeah.
which burnout, like, being impressed, that is becoming more and more difficult, because you've seen so many sunrises, so many sunsets, so many beaches, so many mountains, like, oh, okay, another beach, another sunset. So then it becomes more about people, because people are always going to be special, or they're always going to come with new stories. So
Yeah.
this is what keeps you going, I believe, not places. Places are nice. Okay, you go, you see a volcano. I've seen 1 million volcanoes. But if you meet somebody during that trip, visiting a volcano, somebody with an interesting story, this is
Yeah.
what's going to get stuck with
No,
you.
I agree with you. Those are the things that are more impactful, and I've traveled quite a bit, not nearly as much as you, but definitely my memories, my best memories are all around the people rather than the place.
Yeah.
So I think we have a clip. If you can make it play, Paco, just give people a little bit idea. I think. Where did you say this was? Is Afghanistan?
This was in
or-
Afghanistan. I was
Okay.
actually in Afghanistan. Maybe I don't remember. Maybe March, I think.
Okay.
I was in Afghanistan.
And
March
how
or
long? How
April.
long were you there for?
I was there for 10 days, because you cannot just go and travel to Afghanistan.
This is the custom, perfect. So the guest stays there. Ok. Deci ăsta, invitatul stă aici, frate.
So is this in a home
Here,
there?
no?
or-
Yeah, I was invited into an Afghan home.
Here? It's okay here? I'm good. Because I'm the guest.
They're more polite with the guests. That's why they
So they are more polite with the guest. Ah, ok. Very nice. Deci da, oaspetele stă aici, adică așa e regula, astfel încât eu să văd.
The
I think it's
guests.
going into
Care vine
Romania
mâncare,
now.
știți că intră frumos
So-
pe acolo și eu sunt primul care o vede.
So this is
Vedeți aici frumos cuptorul.
This is a very modest Afghani home.
And how did you make the connection to be were they like leery about you filming in their home?
It's
or
very
how?
difficult. First of all, you have to. Well, actually, now it's much easier to go to Afghanistan. Even if you're, let's say, from United States. For me, the fact that I'm from Romania helped me a lot during my travels. Why? Nobody hates Romanians. If you come from United States, you go to a country, you don't know if you get in trouble with the police. Like, it's a good thing because of the very strong passport, but sometimes it can backfire.
Yeah.
If you get yourself into trouble, the fact that you have a very well-known passport, or let's say if you're
They might want to make an example out of you.
Exactly. If you go, for example, if you go to some countries in Africa and you're from France or from Belgium, because they have this bad history, you don't know what might happen to you. Once you say, oh, I'm from Romania, first of all, most of the people don't know anything about Romania. The people who know things about Romania know that, we had a dictator, we were good in football back in the 90s, and that was everything, So actually, to get the visa, you just have to get a special permit from the Talibans. They have to agree to this, and they research everything about you. You have like an interview, but it was one of the nicest experience I have ever had in my life. I went to Pakistan and I had to apply to go to the embassy in Pakistan, because Afghanistan doesn't have embassies all over the world.
Yeah.
It's being recognized by, I don't know, a couple of countries, the Taliban regime. And I just went there, and of course, the question, what do you do for a living, always shows up. And when you're a travel vlogger and you want to go to these countries, you really need to know how to actually answer this question, because sometimes if the person asking you doesn't pay so much attention, he's just filling out a form. Most of the times I say I'm a freelancer or I'm an actor. But if the person shows more interest, you cannot lie, and you cannot say you cannot hide the fact that you're a YouTuber, because this can backfire a lot. You have to be like, have to pay attention to what you're actually saying, because I was there in the embassy, and the guy asked me, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a freelancer. I do that. Okay, and now what's your main occupation? I had to say, I'm a YouTuber. You're a YouTuber. Okay, can I please see your channel? And I knew, okay, can I please see your channel? This means that he's going to do some research about me. So the first rule, I never publish during my stay in the country. Even though I didn't say anything, there was nothing bad happening over there. But you know that you're under scrutiny and you know that you're being followed like 24/7. Second thing, you cannot just go and travel to Afghanistan like you come here. You need to go through an agency. Normally, there are like maybe 3 of them who do this. And it's like very, very, very expensive because the permits are really expensive. The quality of the places in which you're staying is subpar,
Yeah.
you know. But there is more about the idea of going to a forbidden country, so to say. So it was interesting. I was in Iraq. I was in many um, not so simple countries to travel to. But as always, one thing that I've learned, it doesn't matter where you go. People from all countries, they just want the same thing. They want to have a normal life. They want to be able to go to school. They want to afford food. Like the governments of countries don't, like most of the time, they don't represent the country. Whenever you hear something bad about a country, you mostly hear about the governments or very isolated issues. If you, let's say you're from Romania, you're never going to hear about the guy who went to United States and nothing happened to him. You're going to hear about the guy who went to Miami, who wanted to do some weird stuff, and he ended up, I don't know, in police custody. Because good things don't make the news.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody went to El Salvador and they had a good time, not going to make the news. But the fact that you were killed in El Salvador, of course, is going to be like headlining all over the world, you know.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, with all your experience, what do you think is the most underrated country out there? The one that kind of surprised you the most of how beautiful it was or how great your time there was?
There are many countries who would enter, who would qualify in this category. But right now, and I might be biased saying this because it's a very recent event, uh, I- I would say China.
Really?
Yeah, China was for me everything, no, the complete opposite of everything that I expected. Like, first of all, back home, China doesn't, people don't read the government, doesn't respect your privacy, doesn't respect the fact that they can see this, you have facial recognition, you have that. When I arrived there, I was like, either way, if the government wants to find out something about me, they're gonna find out something about me. Whenever I download an app or you go on Facebook or whatever, you agree to some things that you never read through those things, you know? So the fact that we had back home tons of paranoia towards this, it's because in our societies we value freedom more than everything else. There are countries where freedom comes second to order. For them, is much more important to have order and then to have freedom. And people are used to this. For example, just imagine this. Just imagine that you'd have a riot in China. The government cannot afford to have a riot because there a riot can be, I don't know, millions of people going out on the street, you know? It's not like back home when you have, I don't know, a couple of thousand, you have 100,000 people that go outside, they do something. So of course that the government has to, I don't agree to the Chinese government. I don't agree to how things work there, but I understand that different countries, different systems.
Yeah.
This is really, really important. From my point of view, I had no problem. It was very clean. I could walk at night at 2 a.m. without any problems. You cannot do this in France. You cannot do this in Germany. You cannot do this in Western Europe nowadays. It's very, very, very difficult to do this. And also people, if you've grown up and everybody, all your culture, all the people that you've interacted with, never portrayed freedom as the most important value of your society, you don't have a big problem with this. Or if you have a problem with this, it's second or third or fourth in the line of problems that one might encounter, you know? So this was the country that shocked me the most. Well, no, to be honest, now if I put it like this, Salvador would be the country that shocked me the most because I had two completely different experiences in the span of, I don't know, 8 years. But yeah, China, because now it's always on the news, on the
Yeah.
news, on the news with bad things. But my favorite country, like the country from
Like
whom
if you had to pick one place to live the rest of your life, you weren't going to be allowed to travel anymore. Where would you
no, I think that if I were to, I think I'd go back home.
go back home?
Yes, yes. But you know why? This is what I say now when I'm not back home. Whenever I go back home after 2 weeks, I get angry and I want to leave, you know. But now because I'm so far away, like it's very the grass looks greener on the other side, and now
Yeah.
home is more or less the other side, you know. So whenever I go back home, nostalgia hits hard. Oh, I want this. I miss my friends. I miss people. And then whenever I meet people, my friends from back in the day, I realize that you just meet from for some beers, but there are no
Their life is very different.
there is no connections there. You just you remember back in the 4th grade or in high school, and that's it. Because the next day, because they say, you know what, I have to go home tomorrow. My son is going to. I have to take him to kindergarten. I have to go to work. And me, I just think, okay, let's search which are the cheapest tickets to go to Australia or whatever, you know. So you've burned some bridges. Well, no, you didn't burn those
Yeah.
the bridges. They were burnt by time, by
Yeah.
you
This is
know,
natural, normal.
natural. But if I were to leave, I think I'd go back home. But one country from um, one country where I believe that all the people who work in administration, if like, for example, if you want to become a mayor or if you want to whatever, people should go to Japan. I'm not saying it's a very sick society, very weird, very weird society, but I'm saying I would agree. For example, if in Romania they say, okay, in order to become a mayor, you have to go and do a 3 months internship in Japan to see how things work there. And you know, the whole time you hear stories about Japan, everything works like clockwork and whatever. But once you go there, to me, it happened to me, being on a bullet train that had a delay of less than 30 seconds. You leave the train and you have all the train staff coming outside and actually apologizing for this. This is, of
Wow.
course, no, extreme,
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah.
But this happened to me. This happened to me. So whenever you hear those things, I left my wallet with more than 500 euros on a bench in a subway, and the metro station, the metro system in Japan is, I don't know, there are millions of people every day. So this was like central station. I left it there. How do I know that I left it there? Because I was just filming, and then I took the metro. I went to visit the temple. I reached out to my wallet. I couldn't find it, and then I said, "You know what? I'm going to look to watch the footage, what I filmed." And then I saw, okay, I had it in my hand here, and then I placed it somewhere. Okay, let's see where was that. I went back. My wallet was there. Nobody touched it, and I'm sure that during that hour, more than 10,000, maybe who knows, 20,000 people passed.
Yeah.
So yeah, like for example, in order to become a good citizen, especially if you work into administration, you should say, okay, you want to become mayor, go to Japan, 3 months. Learn how they do things there, come here, and then implement it.
I love that.
I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't leave in Japan. It's especially as a foreigner.
Yeah.
Especially as a foreigner, I think it's like very difficult to blend in.
No, that's what I've heard. That it's even some places they said that they weren't allowed in. That it was Japanese only.
No,
in
you are
certain
not
places.
allowed.
Yeah.
No, there are neighborhoods, and this is not just in Japan. Also in South Korea. Like for example, I remember one anecdote. It happened to me. I just wanted to go and visit some nightclubs, and I knew that part of the city was Koreans only, and it was very interesting because I wanted to enter in a nightclub, and there was this big bouncer who just told me, "Hey, wait, you Korean?" He asked me. I was like, "Man, do I look Korean?" I could you could tell him that I don't know that I'm from Turkey. I'm from I'm not Korean. And he said, "No, you cannot enter if you're not Korean." And then we became friends. And then I said, "You know, I just want to go inside for half an hour and see how it is, you know." And he allowed me. But yes.
Yeah.
For example, if you're older than 30, you're not allowed to enter in many establishments. If you are ugly, you're not allowed to enter in the establishment. Really, like for example, you go to some places. I actually did this. I wanted to go to 5 places, which I knew that they're Asian only, Korean only, and based on looks. And I said, okay, let's see how many of these places I can enter. This was like 6 years ago, and I was allowed in 3 of them. In 2 of them, they said no, too old. So for me, it was like, well, at least I was allowed in 3 of them, which was very
At
crazy
least they didn't
because
say too ugly.
yeah, exactly. So it was really interesting because back home, now we are all victims of this. Oh, everybody gets so easily offended. I don't know how it's in the United States,
Oh yeah.
but in Europe, you cannot use, I don't know, some kind of words. You cannot. It's really, really, really crazy. This, like really crazy. I see it, and I was thinking, back home, would this be possible for me to open an establishment and to say I only accept, I don't know, black people? No, never, ever. So but it's a cultural difference.
Yeah.
You need to understand, for example, there Korea, Japan are very isolated countries, are countries where they don't, like, just pay attention to one thing. Name me one Hollywood star who is married to a Japanese woman. Maybe, I don't know, besides but no. John Lennon, the Beatles were from the UK. Yeah, no.
I think so.
I
Yeah.
think
don't know.
John Lennon had his wife. She was Japanese. But what I want to say is that they don't blend in.
Yeah.
There is tons of racism in Japan. I've said this 1 million times, but it's the type of racism that actually doesn't. I was victim of racism in Japan, but it didn't bother me so
Yeah.
much because it's type of racism that more of an elitism. Like, you know what? I'm just going to. It's not that people treat you bad. It's just that they don't pay attention to
Yeah.
you. You're never going to see somebody talking bad to you or I don't know, saying bad words to you. No, but you don't get white privilege or foreigner privilege over there. Which, to be honest, I don't think is such a bad thing. If you go to Southeast Asia, there you're treated like a king. There, if you have to queue, and there are like 5 Thai people in front of you, they're going to give you priority. So this is not. I don't think it's so
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Interesting. Well, I hope now that we've introduced you to Bitcoin here,
Yeah.
I think you'll find as you travel that it'll be a handy tool just to have in a lot of places, because even there's apps like Bitrefill is one company where you can buy like all kinds of gift cards in countries around the world with Bitcoin. So
Okay.
if you have a time that you don't have any funds, I
Okay.
think just always keeping a little Bitcoin on you, and then hopefully as you kind of understand it more and more and watch it go up in value versus everything else, I think it can be a huge tool for you as you travel.
Yes. I'm going to research more into this actually, because here it was proven to me that it works, and it's the ease of access is what attracts me the most. Because, to be honest, why I was a Bitcoin, not Bitcoin, I was a crypto skeptic, you could call it, because I was never able to see Bitcoin more than an investment.
Yeah.
I said, okay, but how can I use it? Maybe I don't want to invest. I'm very bad at investments. I don't invest my money, just as I said, real estate and whatever, because I don't want to think about losing. I don't want to be stressed all the time what might happen. So I was like, if this were used more let's say at a global scale, I think I'd be one of the first person. I would say, okay, I want to use this nonstop. But this is the thing now that I think well, I don't know why is this, like many governments, or I don't know why societies don't adopt it, don't implement it more.
Well, most because they want to be able to print their money out of thin air. So governments have this unique privilege of being able to just print money. You and I can't do that. They arrest us if we do that.
Yeah.
But governments can do that. And so they don't want to give that up. But that's why the value of money keeps going down, because they print it out of thin air. So Bitcoin, it kind of levels the playing field for the world. Nobody can just print it. They can't ever have more than 21 million. It's something that's fair for everybody. So that's why a lot of governments are against it. And that's why it was such a big step for El Salvador to make that decision to adopt it. So
Yeah, as I said, if this were to happen in at a global scale, I think it would be, as I said, just for the ease of access.
oh yeah, it's how much easier if you don't have to think about ever exchanging money. You just
Yes,
know
yes.
you got it on your phone. So
But I believe that either way, the future I'm sure 100% is indeed this direction.
Yes.
My only concern is that um, I don't know how it works nowadays, but I think that if this were to become, let's say, the to become mainstream, I'm sure that governments would get involved, and I'm sure we'd have or Bitcoin or whatever or crypto would have the crypto world would have tons of regulations, and I'm a bit afraid of saying, oh, okay, but what if this is going to just replace what we're actually complaining about now?
Yeah. No, and I think that's important. The good thing about the way Bitcoin is set up and that it's decentralized and it's run by all these nodes that you can cut off half of them, but the other ones keep the system up and going. Governments can try to restrict what their own citizens can do, but it's very hard for them to actually kill it or to keep people from being able to use it. So that's why and there's lots of governments that have tried, but it just keeps growing. So, but I want to make sure that people know where they can follow your channel. I'm gonna start following it now that you go into all these cool places. So, make sure people know where they can follow you on YouTube, and then I don't know if you're on Instagram or whatever other socials.
Instagram, backpack your life all over, like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook,
Okay.
whatever. Yeah,
And just backpack life.
just no, backpack your life. Backpack your life.
Backpack your life.
I-
Okay, there it is right there. on the
Exactly.
screen.
Actually, I came up with this name. I was hiking the Colca Canyon, which is in Peru, and then I wanted to search for a name, and I had a piece of paper with me, and I started. Okay, I might put this. Because as I said at first, I started in English because I wanted to improve my English. Back then, I was like, okay, I'm going to do it in English. But then I was like, you know what? There are so many people doing it in English. Is there anybody doing it in Romanian? No. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
this is my train. This is my train. So out of sheer luck, it was yeah.
How many languages do you speak now?
Well, actually, I studied French in school quite a lot,
Okay.
but because I don't know, everybody from my generation back home in Romania has something. We have something not against French people, but against French culture, I believe. So I also went so many times. I traveled in France, but I can understand French, let's say more than 95%. I can speak if I'm forced, if I'm held at the gunpoint, you know, maybe I'm able to speak French. But Spanish, which I learned it just by traveling in Latin America, because when you come to Latin America, and also because I travel alone, when you travel in group, let's say you just speak English, you tend to speak English with the people you're currently
Yeah.
with, But because I travel alone in 95% of the time, is like I had to interact with people, I had to speak with people. So it was very easy. I think in less than 6 months, I was able to have a decent conversation. And I also speak a bit and I can understand a bit of Portuguese because I traveled a lot in Brazil.
Okay.
But
English, obviously.
yeah.
Romanian.
Yeah. Romanian is very similar. Like for example, because it's a Latin language, it's part of like French, Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, and Romanian, are all Latin languages. So many words are similar, and also because we had tons of soap operas back home, and I was very young. My mother watched soap operas from Mexico, from Colombia. So any Romanian gonna ask, they're gonna know estoy embarazada or all of these things. Everybody knows that. So it's really, really easy for us to whenever we travel abroad, especially if we come to Latin America, to actually understand some words.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on your successful channel, and we'll be following you. And I appreciate you joining us. And I love just your story of you coming here and seeing El Salvador reborn and hearing that from you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.